I want to go ahead and say a few preliminary remarks for those of you who are visiting with us or those of you who are streaming with us. We would love to have you on our mailing list. I send out an email blast every Thursday to about 10,000 people about what's going to be happening here at All Saints Church, including what's going to happen here in the Rector's Forum every Thursday. And we would love to have you on that. So you can, there's a sign-up sheet right outside upstairs of the cloister, and also at the welcome table. We'd love to have your participation in that. Also, October is Giving Month here at All Saints Church. We would love to have your support, your investment. You're helping us to underwrite this place. And so there is a giving table on the lawn. We would love to have you go there and fill out a pledge card or have a conversation with somebody who can be in touch with you about making a pledge. Today, we put our faith into action every Sunday here at All Saints Church. We are an activist church, and we invite people to participate. We have a letter to President Obama today about the Ebola crisis. We also are taking some stands having to do with the climate crisis, about whom our speaker will address in a few minutes, and also some things about violence prevention with teenagers. So we would really appreciate your going by our action table today on the lawn and taking some action. We're thrilled to have our speaker today. I want to hold up his book, which is available for your purchase. It's called Reclaiming Our Democracy. This is the 20th anniversary edition. He'll be talking with you about it. But Sam is a kind of a father to activism in the United States. I found out about him through our friend Marianne Williamson, who wrote me and said, Sam's going to be in town. It'd be really cool for you to have him at All Saints Church, because he is absolutely one of my inspirations when I got started, and he is a great soul. So we're really, really thrilled to have with us Sam Daley-Harris. Will you please warmly give him a welcome to All Saints? Welcome.
Thank you. It's such a thrill to be here. I want to actually dedicate my presentation to my wife, who I believe is watching the streaming from our home in New Jersey. And she's organized for some 20 years the National Observance of Children's Sabbath with and for the Children's Defense Fund, which is this weekend. So I want to dedicate my remarks to that and to her. I also want to start with a thank you, and I actually use this quote. I'll use two Mark quotes, Mark Hatfield and Mark Twain. And I use this as a way of acknowledging people, but most particularly this church and the activism that is so inspiring and coming from this church. Mark Hatfield, the late U.S. Senator from Oregon, Republican, said, "We stand by as children starved by the millions because we lack the will to eliminate hunger. Yet we have found the will to develop missiles capable of flying over the polar cap and landing within a few hundred feet of their target. This is not innovation. It is a profound distortion of humanity's purpose on earth." I'm going to repeat that. He said, "We stand by as children starved by the millions because we lack the will to eliminate hunger. Yet we have found the will to develop missiles capable of flying over the polar cap and landing within a few hundred feet of their target. This is not innovation. It is a profound distortion of humanity's purpose on earth," end of quote. And for me, that's an expression of what this church is about, correcting that distortion of humanity's purpose on earth, and I thank you for that. This next quote is attributed to Mark Twain, who is purported to have said, "The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why." The two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you found out why. And for me, I would say that in a quiet moment, we'd all agree that the why has something to do with giving back, contributing, leaving the campsite cleaner than we found it. The problem is there are these layers of discouragement and hopelessness and cynicism that stuff that desire down. But when we can release it, that natural desire to contribute can be released. There are three main messages from Reclaiming Our Democracy. The first is that most people are hopeless and cynical about making a difference with their voice as a citizen. The second is, for the last 35 years, I've seen people make a profound difference on issues they care about. The challenge is finding an organization that can provide a deep structure of support, that can provide an offering of inspiration and empowerment. And so let me just throw these things out. My goals for this talk are, number one, to acknowledge the brilliant activism from All Saints Church in Pasadena. Number two, to inspire you. That's not started yet. And number three is to inspire you to take the things you're already doing and perhaps go more deeply with them. And the fourth one is to visit some of the tables over on the side where there are people from Results working on global and domestic poverty, people from Citizens Climate Lobby working on climate, and folks from the Peace Alliance. They're particularly working on the Youth Promise Act, supporting funding of violence prevention programs in communities around the United States. These particular organizations are offering this structure of support that I'm going to describe in more depth in a moment. I'm going to start with my story, and then 5 stories from the road. They're very, very brief. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic in Florida, the orchestra, for 12 years. I taught high school music. And then I started a citizen lobby group on ending global poverty. And a lot of times it's like a head snapper. What was that about? And what motivated that change? And when I look back in my life, there are a couple of experiences that come to mind. And one is I graduated from high school in 1964, and I played timpani in the orchestra at the graduation ceremony. And just before the ceremony, a flute player came back to the percussion section and told me that a high school fraternity brother, a year younger, had died the day before in a tractor-trailer accident. It was her next-door neighbor, so she knew about it before I did. I always say I was 17. When I was 17, I thought I had forever. I mean, mortality was an irrelevant concept. But during that time in the mourning period and the funeral, after the funeral, I went with his younger brother to collect my friend's report card from his homeroom teacher. It started to dawn on me that maybe I had 17 more minutes or months or years, and the questions of purpose, why am I here? What am I here to do? Started to come up. No answers, but they just started to come up. 4 years later, 1968, college graduation. The night before, Robert Kennedy's assassinated. And it's another one of those, what is this life? What is this death? Why am I here? What am I here to do? No answers, but the questions are getting really clear now. I'm kind of slow, so 9 years later, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger through the Hunger Project. And I went to this thing, listen, this is really, I think, really important. I went to this thing thinking, well, hunger's inevitable because there are no solutions. Because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. I mean, that's what I was thinking. I go to this presentation and I realize the obvious. There's no mystery to growing food. There's no mystery to clean water or basic health or literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that could be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions. Why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. In 1978 and 1979, I speak to 7,000 high school students. This is the end of this story. In Miami, Florida, where I lived, and Los Angeles, where I moved. And I spoke to these high school students classroom by classroom. And before going into the first classroom, I read statements from the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, Food and Nutrition Study, and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met, just the name. Anyone who doesn't know this story, anyone want to guess the number out of 7,000? Two? Okay, we have an optimist over there. Now, actually 200 knew, fewer than 3%. 6,800 didn't know, just over 97%. And results, this anti-poverty lobby started out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. That was 1980 in Los Angeles. And so let me just jump to these 5 very short stories. The first and second combined are last fall, I spoke on 15 college campuses. This was the LBJ School at the University of Texas, the Hubert Humphrey Institute, University of Minnesota, Oberlin College. And I told the students that I'd asked 7,000 who their congressperson was, and fewer than 3% could answer correctly 35 years ago. And then I asked the college students. Anyone want to guess? 10% could answer correctly, and 90% 35 years later could not. Now, it's a very simple thing. I mean, that's insufficient, but it's a step. But 10% was still way, way too low. Story number 3. I spoke at a senior citizen lecture series where I live in Princeton, New Jersey, and the person who organized it said, well, every 2 weeks we get 200 seniors. I thought, I don't think so. So I went a month early to check it out. And I'm sitting on the front row, and the moderator says, in 2 weeks we'll hear from so-and-so, and 2 weeks after that, we'll hear from Sam Daley-Harris on reclaiming our democracy, healing the break between people and government. And there were chuckles in the room. And I'm thinking, well, wait, the students are kind of oblivious. And what, the seniors are a little cynical, maybe? I mean, they were brilliant a month later, but it was just an interesting moment. Story number 4. I spoke at a major elite Ivy League college in March, and before the lecture, I met with a genius guru of organizing, a professor. He had never heard of Results or Citizen Climate Lobby, one of the groups that I'd been coaching for 7 years. And it was 20 minutes of, now, why do you do it that way? And what's the response when you ask people to do that? And what's the reaction with this? At the end of 20 minutes, he looks at me and he says, yeah, but Congress is really dysfunctional. I said, yeah, Congress is really dysfunctional, and this year it appropriated $1.65 billion for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. I said, Congress is really dysfunctional, and this year it appropriated $700 million for maternal and child health programs all around the world. I said, Congress is really dysfunctional, but if you roll up your sleeves, do your homework, and get in there, you can make big things happen. But you, again, have to find an organization that really has a powerful structure of support, not a click here, you're done, click here, you're done. Last story. In April, I spoke at Rutgers, the university in New Jersey. And before the lecture, I spoke to small groups of students sitting around tables. I get to the last table, the last student says, I'm in an honors futures class. With a view to 50 years in the future, what's the most important issue we could work on? I said, well, my friends in climate change tell me if we don't deal with that, we're toast. And my friends in campaign finance reform say if we don't fix that, nothing's going to change. And my friends in global poverty tell me it's a blight on humanity. But for me, the most important issue is why so few of us see ourselves as change makers. If we could fix that, there would be a barrage of people into all of these issues, and we could make a much bigger difference. I'm going to discuss some campaigns and some victories in the U.S. Congress, but I really want to focus on the how did it happen? What were citizens provided that allowed it to happen? In 1984, Results started lobbying on child survival issues. UNICEF was reporting that 41,000 children under the age of 5 were dying every day from largely preventable, underline preventable, malnutrition and disease, things like measles coupled with malnutrition. In 1986, the volunteers around the country generated, there's one from 84 who generated the very first editorial in the United States, Mike Squires of this parish, in the Hartford Courant, I believe I'm correct, on our first actions on these child survival issues. Another person in this room who was like a major gift to Results and a lot of the other organizations that are following these methodologies is Dorsey Lawson, whose work in the Pasadena area and the nation has been critical to the kinds of breakthroughs we've had. Well, we generated 90 editorials in '86 on tripling the Child Survival Fund, and we'd send them 4 at a time, 5 at a time, to members of Congress, the administration, UN agencies. At the end, the last cover letter, it would have like 5 editorials after it, or 4. The head of UNICEF, Jim Grant, takes our cover letter, and he writes on the right-hand margin the following: "I want to convey my heartfelt thanks for the unflagging and satisfyingly successful efforts of Results on behalf of vulnerable children and mothers everywhere. I thank you in my mind weekly," because he used to get these packets of editorials, "if not more often, for you and your colleagues are accomplishing, but I thought I should do it at least once this year in writing." Results has continued year in, year out for 30 years on the appropriations of these. It's grown from 25 million to 700 million. And the latest statistics from the UN Children's Fund are that the 41,000 a day have dropped to 17,000 a day. And the latest goal is 0 preventable deaths in the next 15 years. I mean, that's the opportunity that we have to be part of, to tell our grandchildren that we were part of this kind of initiative. Last one, there was a New York Times article a year ago, and Kul Gautam, who was deputy executive director of UNICEF, said, "To a great extent, it was because of the receptivity created by Results that the U.S. funding for child survival increased so dramatically, starting in the mid-'80s, and that led to many other countries coming on board." So I really want to get in for a moment to how do you generate 90 editorials in 1 year on a thing that's not really in the news, actually? And one of the pieces is focus, that an organization focuses for the whole year on one issue. And most advocacy efforts fail to provide a legislative focus, but developing a ledge agenda that's inspiring and focus keeps staff and volunteers from flitting from issue to issue, and instead they can drill down deep and begin to feel confident and competent to pick up the phone and call the paper or whatever it is. I'm going to say more about that in a moment. I want to do one other story this way about a citizen climate lobby and how it's been used. This methodology that I'm going to describe in a moment has been used more recently. I got a call in 2007 from a Results volunteer, Marshall Saunders. He said, "I saw an inconvenient truth 3 times in 10 days, and then I went to Nashville, one of the 1,000 trained to lead the slideshow. I went home to San Diego. I led it 43 times. But early on, I realized I was giving people 98% the problem and 2% what they could do about it, and that they couldn't buy enough Priuses or change enough light bulbs to make up for what the government was or wasn't doing." And he said, "Would you coach me in starting Citizens Climate Lobby?" And so we worked together for 7 years. And today, Citizens Climate Lobby, that's one of the tables over there, they have 202 chapters in the US and Canada. And here's an idea of some of their growth. Look at the bottom. In the first 9 months of this year, their volunteers have had 1,631 letters to the editor published, up from 36 in 2010. In the first 9 months of this year, they've had 883 meetings with members of Congress, Canadian Parliament, or their staff, up from 105 in 2010. If you want greatness from volunteers, you have to provide a great structure of support. And one piece of the puzzle is an empowering conference call. I mean, groups are beginning to do webinars and conference calls, but they're really good in doing them in a disempowering way, and I'm going to describe some segments. So one segment is a guest speaker. Now, most groups who do a webinar, they don't have a guest speaker. They have staff this month. Next month, they'll have staff. And then the month after that, they'll have staff. But they don't bring a member of Congress or an expert from around the country in as a guest speaker. And if they do, they'll talk the entire 25 minutes, and everyone around the country is like a bump on a log. That's a disempowering way to do it. The empowering way is to insist that the speaker speaks for 10 minutes, a little longer than I'm going, so there's time for Q&A and some interaction. Next piece, grassroots victories. Now, most groups that would have a webinar, they wouldn't have someone in Boise tell about their success they'll skip it. And if they include it, they'll only do the success. Like, I met with my member of Congress yesterday. It was a blast. We can't wait to do it again. But they leave out the struggle. They leave out that it took 11 phone calls to get the appointment. If you leave that out, there are people around the country going, we've made 2 calls, maybe we should focus on something else. If you include it, they're going, boy, we've made 2 calls, I guess we have 9 more to go, let's get on it, kind of thing. So when you include the struggle and then the breakthrough, you have people with you all around the country. Another component is a practice to be more articulate. If you're on a typical webinar or conference call, there's no practice to be articulate. And if there is, someone will do a role play with a member of Congress or an aide, and it's terrible, awful. But all anyone can say is, thank you so much for volunteering. You are so courageous. No, you have to have some coaching that really gives an idea of what's possible. I'm going to close with an excerpt from the book and a quote. Ellie Sparks is a volunteer from Citizens Climate Lobby. She said, before I joined, I was suffering from climate trauma. I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and I would weep at home, and I would weep at work. And 18 months later, after joining, she's co-leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. And so she, on their conference call a month later, 2 Augusts ago, describing her workshop, she said, our director, Mark Reynolds, likes to say, we're betting the farm on relationships. Then he tells us we need to build relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. Most of us CCL volunteers have never done that before. What in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress looks like? How do we connect with editorial page editors? Some of us have found models for those relationships in other parts of our lives. Gary in Boston uses the work model. My relationship model is different. This is where she starts to soar. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date, only you've decided ahead of time you're going to marry this fellow. You're going to be sweet and interesting, not too intense. If it doesn't work with the editor, you'll marry one of his friends at the newspaper. Who do you know that talks like this? The business editor, environment writer, city editor, someone from this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. At the time she was writing this, she was living in Richmond, Virginia. Her congressman was Eric Cantor, and her newspaper was the Richmond Times-Dispatch. She continues, I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in her district, the member's aide has to meet with you. That's what our congressman's ledge director told us several years ago, January. Since then, we've met 9 times with the legislative director. We schedule 45-minute meetings with him. He keeps us for well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and slowly heats up over time. That's different than a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. I'll skip and end with this. She said, this is the sheer brilliance. During our conference, I met with 20 congressional offices over several days. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart towards them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work. Now, don't forget, she started at climate trauma and ends up at sacred and to profound. And I think if I asked a normal person to meet with a member of Congress, 20 congressional offices, I think they'd say, well, this is hard work or dirty work. She ends up at sacred and profound. And so I think there's this drawing in one of the chapters, a small circle, it's labeled your comfort zone. Then a much larger circle labeled where the magic happens. You have to find organizations that help you move from your comfort zone over to where the magic happens. And so the results table, the Citizen Climate Lobby table, the Peace Alliance table are groups that are learning these lessons with the conference calls and the other things. I'm going to close with this from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. And if you'll bear with me, this is the true joy in life. The being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch that I want to make burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. End of quote. It's been such an honor speaking to you at All Saints. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thanks, Sam. Raise your hands if you want to pose a question. We have about 10 minutes for that, and I'm going to pose the first one. So, Sam, thanks so very much. I really, really appreciate what you were saying and agree with it all, and particularly the call to hope in the midst of cynicism. What I'd love for you to address is that we live now in a post, what is it called, the United, the rendering from the Supreme Court, Citizens United. We live in a post-Citizens United world where corporations are considered people and their megabucks are considered free speech. And we had a conversation here in this forum last year about a conversation between Bill Moyers and Paul Krugman. And Krugman said that after Piketty's book came out, that he really, and talking about the disparity between rich and poor, that we really are living in a different political world, and democracy is in a very different political world, and democracy is more vulnerable than ever before. Now, he ended on a hopeful note, but I would just love to hear from you, let us pick your brain a little bit, about all the consultation you've done to all of these organizations that promote democracy. How has Citizens United. And the world we live in, where we have so much money that seems to outweigh how many letters are in the are sent to the editor. So how do you struggle with that as an organizer?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, Citizens United was a travesty. And money in politics is abhorrent. But it only works because people are asleep. If you had all the money in the world and the people were awake, they'd watch these commercials and laugh and be repulsed, perhaps. And so part of my question is, what about the day after the election, and the week after, and the month after, and the year after? So that's part of it. Another part of it is, bringing these kinds of methodologies that I've been talking about into the groups that are working on these democracy issues of campaign finance. So that's also important. I'll kind of close with a quote on this answer from Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweickart, who said, "We aren't passengers on spaceship Earth. We're the crew. We aren't residents on this planet. We're citizens. The difference in both cases is responsibility." And so, we need to, if campaign finance reform is your issue, jump in. And also, if the organizations you're jumping into is giving you, I'm going to tell you this one thing. I have this list of NGO, non-governmental organization attitudes that kill citizen empowerment and transformation. And I was in England in May, and I put the first two attitudes on the board, which are quotes from NGOs I've met with. And a woman in the room says, "That's us. That's number two, that's us." And the attitude was, we can't have our volunteers write letters to the editor and op-eds because they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization. I said, yeah, if you give them a kindergarten curriculum, they'll get it wrong. If you gave them something richer, you end up with Citizen Climate Lobby getting 1,631 letters published in the first 9 months of this year. But we need to work in so many different levels, and yeah.
Questions? We just wanted to bring it back. And where's the next one? Let's get the microphone to the next question first. And ready to go.
Thank you. You talked about Citizens United, and I think it's a really great example of the distortions that we live in these days. I mean, things are extreme in one direction or another, and it's made life a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult for so many people. And I think that living these days can just be so challenging in and of itself. So it's not even that necessarily you're getting caught up in your own narcissistic grievances, but that even just surviving can be so difficult. You have to work so hard, and things are, expensive. When people come to you and they feel their inspiration, they feel their passion for what it is that they want to do, but they feel weighted down by so much of what their life demands of them, what exercises do you give them, or where do you tell them to go to help build the strength in the inspiration and to move forward and not get bogged down by the darker side of things?
Well, again, it's finding those organizations that don't just provide you with kindergarten, but get you to 3rd and 5th and 9th and 12th in college as an advocate. It's organizations that help you move carefully out of your comfort zone over to where the magic happens. They're writing letters to the editor, or they're having a conference call guest that inspires, and they're hearing a victory from someone over in Boston and saying, we could do that. We could do that. They're in these communities of empowerment and engagement, and that they're being taken along the road from kindergarten onward as an activist.
Next question. Right down here. Yeah. If the third questioner will hold your hand, we'll get the microphone to you now. Okay, please.
The social media has taken over all forms of communication, and editorials aren't read by many people today. How do we use social media as the vehicle to get the word out?
Well, to be honest, I'm not all that an expert on social media, but I want to get to the other part of your question, and that is part of that. You remember I said attitudes that kill citizen empowerment. The sister organization from the British NGO was the one I'd gotten this from. And they said to me, well, you know, we have 15 media staff at headquarters. They take care of the media. I said, sure, but they take care of the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, and the LA Times. Who's working with the Salt Lake Tribune? Who's working with the Tampa Bay Tribune or the Miami Herald, where the Congress is? So yes, newspapers might be shrinking, editorial boards might be shrinking, but still, if I'm a member of Congress and I'm in Washington and I want to look back to Pasadena to see what the conversation is today, do I look to a key blogger? I might, but I certainly am going to look to the LA Times or the Pasadena Star News or wherever. So I would argue that the mainstream media is shrinking, but it's not gone. And it's where people who are stuck in Washington several days a week look back to. And if you get a letter to the editor published, don't just click your heels and be done. Send it to the aide in Washington for the senators and the rep and follow up on the phone and make sure they saw it and get more mileage out of it. And of course, put it out on social media. But I think I think we've said the demise of the mainstream media too quickly and that it's really usable more than we know. Who else? Last one?
Right here. There are two. One here on the front, and then one over the side. Take it over, please. Bill, raise your hand so the mic can know where you are.
Hi, my husband and I both work with children. I work with younger elementary school children, and my husband works with high school students. So this is a very simple question. It's very general, but you can take it any direction you want to take it. How do we help?
I get nervous when I'm being told I'm being asked this simple question. I bet you this is going to be hard.
How do we help children, the future generation, feel empowered? How do you help them discover their whys? And that's a very simple question.
Let me take the next one, and then is there one more, and then I'll go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about the motivational potential in the interreligious community for climate change. I think it's a great resource, but I'm wondering how that gets most effectively mobilized, whether or not the climate lobby is a kind of institution that can take on the vast potential in the interfaith community for climate change.
Great, thanks. So back to elementary school and high school. I mean, it would be wonderful to find appropriate ways to take a unit that you're studying that has some reflection to policy and let the kids learn about that and perhaps write a member of Congress and at first see if they or their aide would come speak to the class or to the whole grade or the whole school and find ways that those whom we elect could become more real than ignored. And so that, there's one level where you're actually writing them on a policy issue. That's something you might need to check with the principal and the parents. The other is you're actually asking them to come talk to the students about the different aspects of whatever it is that you're studying and kind of make it real in their lives. So that's one piece. I don't know if that's helpful. And over here, at some level, it's really congregants, let's say, on climate issues who are a member of this parish or a synagogue or a Catholic parish or a Muslim mosque who need to do that kind of work, I think, with members of their congregation. That talking to others, talking to the Social Action Committee, talking to the pastor, and making it real and bringing it forward. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I've got. Let me just remind people, there are folks on global and domestic poverty results, on climate change, on the Peace Alliance over there. Please check it out if one of them calls you. I'll be signing some books over here. There's a sign-in sheet in a spiral that's, okay, great, you might pass. There was one in a spiral notebook that I was passing around. Okay, great. You might sign that if you're interested too. It's been a real honor being here. I'm so grateful, and thank you so very much. Yeah.